Hey guys, tonight we step into a world of glimmering bronze, towering palaces, and noisy marketplaces where donkey caravans groan under the weight of cargo that's been traded across thousands of miles. You're about to explore a time when kings wrote to each other on clay tablets, when chariots were the ultimate flex, and when life felt, well, pretty advanced until it all fell apart like a badly stacked pile of amphorae. You're in the late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE, a vibrant, interconnected world that spans from the Greek Mycenaeans to the Egyptians, from the Hittites of Anatolia to the rich cities of Mesopotamia. Everyone's got their part to play. Diplomacy is done with flattery and gold trinkets, and royal daughters are traded like rare Pokemon cards, except these alliances are supposed to stop wars, not start them. And yet, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little bedtime crew stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rub your eyes as the sun blazes down on a city you've never heard of, but instantly feel a weird nostalgia for Ugarit. The streets are busy with sandal-slap footsteps, merchants haggling in at least 5 languages, and the savory waft of lamb stew bubbling somewhere out of sight. It's like someone crammed half the Mediterranean into one postcard. Ugarit is just one of dozens of powerful, wealthy cities operating in sync thanks to a vast trade network powered by bronze metal that needs both copper and tin, often imported from absurdly far away. You duck under a low doorway into a scribal school. Kids are copying cuneiform signs onto clay tablets, grinding their teeth in concentration as they try to remember how many wedges go in Hittite. Writing here isn't just about recording taxes or shopping lists. It's a kind of magic. Royal letters, diplomatic treaties, receipts for entire shipments of luxury goods. The kings of this world communicate across vast distances using these clay missives. One pharaoh writes to a Babylonian ruler asking, not so subtly, why he got cheap gold the last time. A Mycenaean ruler sends a gift of perfumed oil but forgets to sign it. There's some passive-aggressive energy in these letters, but they also reveal something deeper, a web of trust, prestige, and shared culture no matter how weirdly tense. You watch a chariot roll by its driver is standing proud, reins looped casually around his wrists, a javelin tucked at his side. Horses snort and stamp like they know they're the Teslas of the Bronze Age. These vehicles aren't for farmers. They're for elites, for warfare, and for looking awesome while riding into battle. Chariots require tons of specialized training, materials, and coordination. They are a flex, yes, but they're also a logistical nightmare. Everything in this world feels sophisticated, but strangely fragile. There's no iron yet. Well, okay, technically there is, but it's super rare and seen as sacred. One Hittite king boasts about receiving a dagger of true iron from the gods, which probably just means it fell from the sky meteorite iron. Imagine wielding a literal space blade. Fringe detail, that dagger might still exist somewhere in a forgotten tomb. If you find it, let me know. The people of this age are part of something that feels stable. Powerful kingdoms like Egypt's New Kingdom, the Hittite Empire, and the Kassites in Babylon have their own beefs. Sure, but they've got trade deals, diplomatic marriages, and maybe a little ancient espionage for fun. It works until it doesn't. And that's what makes this story so chilling, because you can feel it now. In the corners of your mind, something's wrong. The air feels heavier. The scribes look more hurried. The caravans are fewer. You visit a bustling port and notice ships are docking with smaller loads. One sailor grumbles about pirates. Another mutters about famines. A scribe is arguing loudly with a tax collector, his parchment fluttering like a flag of frustration. The Hittites didn't send the grain. He snaps. Again, historians still argue whether this moment, this weird thinning of the seams, was due to climate shifts, political missteps, or maybe just too many moving parts in one massive system. But something's definitely off, and here comes the emotional kicker. You're standing in a temple, sunlight slanting across worn stone idols, incense clinging to your robes. A child clutches their mother's hand, asking if the gods will fix the harvest. The priest doesn't answer. He just stares at the doorway, where smoke curls faintly on the horizon. The hair on the back of your neck prickles, because that smoke, that's not from a local hearth fire. That's war smoke, but not the kind you know, no declaration, no formal battle lines, just a creeping, smoldering dread from across the waves. And you'll see them soon, just not yet. You hear them before you see them, strange voices shouting from the shore, the scrape of hulls against unfamiliar docks, the sudden scatter of birds exploding into the sky. Your feet move instinctively, pulling you toward the clamor, but your stomach is already nodding, because nothing about this feels like a trade visit. Down by the waterfront, people are running, not the busy kind of running. This is the kind where someone just screamed they're here and dropped a basket of fish. You slip into an alley and peer through a crack in the wooden gate. There they are, not soldiers in neat formation, not chariots, no trumpets, no banners, just waves of rough, desperate-looking warriors storming the harbor, wielding curved swords and improvised shields. Some wear odd crested helmets. Others are bare-chested and smeared in ash. Their ships look like something between a canoe and a shark narrow, fast, and terrifyingly efficient. The Sea Peoples, that's what modern historians call them, but nobody really knows what they called themselves. The Egyptians later carved stories about fighting off these invaders and named several of the tribes Shurden, Shekelesh, Peliset, Luca, but it's all a bit like trying to name storm clouds. They appear suddenly, wreck everything, and vanish back into the mist. You watch as they swarm through the harbor, torching warehouses, dragging off loot and prisoners. No demands, no negotiations. It's not conquest, it's collapse. You slip out and follow from a distance, boots crunching on broken amphorae. A merchant's home lies in ruins. Someone has carved strange symbols into the wooden beams. No one's sure if they're tribal marks or just angry scribbles. One theory is that these sea peoples weren't just raiders, but also refugees displaced by drought or war or who knows what. The theory changes depending on who's telling the story. Were they Mycenaeans pushed out by famine, mercenaries turned pirates, people from the central Mediterranean, or even further afield? Historians still argue whether they were a cause or a symptom of the collapse. But one thing's clear, they're not going away. You see their path like breadcrumbs across the map. Ugarit Falls, Cyprus burns. The Hittite capital, Hattusa, a sprawling city once protected by massive stone gates and guarded lions, goes quiet. No more clay letters, no more trade ships. You duck into a tavern, or what's left of it. The fire pit is cold. Overturned jugs smell faintly of spoiled beer, and the air still carries the acrid sting of burnt cedar. You run your fingers along a carved wall, tracing the now pointless inventory of olive oil, wine, and barley, a quiet record of normal life, snuffed out like a candle in wind. Emotion creeps in when you least expect it. You find a child's toy, a clay figurine of a charioteer. Its wheel is missing. It's the sort of thing someone probably meant to come back for. In Egypt, they see it coming. Sort of. Pharaoh Ramses III prepares, in one of the most dramatic and possibly self-serving carvings in history. His scribes chisel a tale into the stone walls of Medne-Habu, his mortuary temple. You see it like a movie in motion, the ships of the sea peoples advancing, the Egyptian archers unleashing arrows from fortified platforms, the waters turning into what can only be described as a chaotic, historically questionable splash zone. Ramses wins, according to Ramses, but even in victory, the tone is grim. The sea peoples don't just attack by land or sea. They bring families, whole migrations, wagons, livestock, women, and children. That's not a raiding party. That's an exodus. You feel it in your bones now. This isn't a single invasion. This is a rolling catastrophe, a domino chain of burned cities, fleeing populations, and collapsing governments, and they seem to strike with eerie coordination. Or maybe, as some fringe scholars speculate, they didn't strike all at once, but centuries of stories were compressed into a single generation by scribes looking for narrative drama. Could it be that we've mistaken decades of unrest for a 50-year apocalypse? You step over a fallen lintel and see the world differently. Every kingdom that once seemed solid is now trembling. The Mycenaeans in Greece, known for their massive stone walls and warrior kings, they vanish from the record almost completely. Linear B, their script, just disappears. Palaces like Pylos and Tiran's ash heaps. And here's a detail that sticks with you. Weapons are found buried hastily, as if their owners never got the chance to use them. You imagine waking up to shouting, grabbing your sword, and running only to realize you're already too late. You come across a burial site, hastily carved into rock. The bodies are wrapped in linen, their arms crossed over their chests. One still clutches a bronze mirror, the polished surface now dulled to a ghostly gray. Someone tried to keep their rituals intact, even as the world unraveled. A cold breeze picks up, carrying the smell of seawater and char. The sea peoples are on the move again, but where are they going next? You trace a map with your finger, Crete already hit, Hattusa gone, Tyre barely holding on. You begin to notice a pattern. The attacks often hit trade hubs, supply depots, palace storehouses, as if someone understood exactly where to strike for maximum chaos. And yet, somehow, no one writes down exactly who these people are. That's the ultimate mystery. One theory suggests that they were part of an economic chain reaction, a group whose homeland was disrupted. who then disrupted others in turn, causing a massive daisy chain of collapses. It's less a villain story, more a tragic domino effect. Still, there's something uncanny about how fast it all moves. You glance out at the sea, calm now, sun dipping low. A single ship rocks gently in the surf. For a moment, it looks abandoned. Then, a figure rises tall, sun darkened, with a blade across his back and a look that says he didn't come here to talk. And you realize they're not done yet. You wake to silence. Not the peaceful kind. This is the suffocating hush of a city waiting for disaster to hit. Or maybe already mourning what it's lost. Ash drifts like gray snow across abandoned courtyards. A clay amphora rolls slowly across the flagstones, bumped by a breeze with no business being this warm. The sea peoples are still out there, but now something else joins the symphony of ruined nature. Itself seems to have flipped the table. You trudge inland from the coasts, expecting safety, only to find fields lying fallow, their cracked surfaces looking more like pottery than soil. Crops aren't just failing, they're vanishing. Olive trees that once bore fruit for pressing now droop. Lifeless, barley won't grow. The rivers are thinner. The rains have stopped. You lift a handful of dirt and let it run between your fingers. It's dust, nothing more. Famine, they whisper. You see it in the faces of travelers heading nowhere. Hollow cheeks, arms too thin to carry even a small child. One man pulls a cart that creaks like it's complaining about every single mile, and you realize nobody's prepared for this, not the kings, not the peasants, not even the scribes with their disaster logs. Historians still argue whether the climate shift was caused by volcanic activity, solar cycles, or a weird confluence of all the above. But ice core samples and pollen records, yes. We have pollen records from 3,000 years ago, because archaeologists are basically pollen detectives. Suggest something big happened. A prolonged drought hits the eastern Mediterranean. Harvests collapse for several consecutive years. And in a world without industrial food transport, that's all it takes. You pass a granary that's been broken into. Inside, you expect chaos, but there's only eerie organization. Someone had the foresight to stack the jars neatly, leaving a little for the next person. Hunger hasn't killed manners, not yet. And if the drought weren't enough, the ground decides to join the rebellion. You feel the tremors before you hear them, a subtle vibration through your toes, a sudden flurry of birds, then the roar, deep and angry. Earthquakes strike in waves. Some small enough to make you laugh nervously was that one, and others powerful enough to make palaces fall like dominoes. You stumble through the ruins of what used to be a Hittite border town. The outer wall has collapsed inward. Roof tiles lie in zigzag patterns like broken teeth. What wasn't burned by the sea peoples is now broken by tectonic fury. And as you pick your way through the debris, something strange catches your eye. Statues knocked over in the same direction. Not looters, not war, just Earth, shrugging. Fringe scholars have proposed that a seismic storm, a period of frequent major earthquakes, may have weakened infrastructure across the region right when it needed strength the most. Now, mix all that with plague, because of course, the records don't say COVID, but there are eerie signs. Sudden population drops, mass graves, letters that mention pestilence from the gods. You meet a healer in a mountain village who's burning herbs and whispering chants to keep the sickness away. She mutters, "You don't ask questions, you just hold your breath." The emotional toll settles over you like a scratchy wool blanket. You're in a village where the temple bells no longer ring. A child hands you a piece of dried fig, her last. She says, you pretend to eat it but tuck it away, unsure whether to cry or thank her. And still, the bureaucracy keeps trying. You find a royal courier half buried under a collapsed gate. His satchel is miraculously intact, filled with clay tablets sealed in wax. You crack one open. It's a plea for grain from a vassal kingdom. Sent weeks ago. Help never came. Then another tablet. This one different. A curse formula. Someone had written it with wild urgency, as if vengeance could be summoned like rain. You read it aloud, quietly, and feel ridiculous, but also not. Something about this time makes you want to believe in magic again. You ride further east and find cities where the elites have vanished, but the lower levels still survive barely. Farmers who used to pay taxes and grain now trade in sheep or work for food. The palace is a charred shell, but the fields are being plowed again, by hand, by people who don't trust government anymore. And the biggest twist in some areas, life improves after the collapse. Fringe archaeologists argue that this breakdown of empire actually allowed smaller communities to return to simpler, more sustainable living. Less tax, fewer wars, more local control. You sit with a family in a reed hut. They cook over a small fire, and while the meal is plain lentils, some herbs, flatbread, it's warm, and the kids laugh when you spill some on your robe. Civilization didn't end, it just got quieter. Still, you're not lulled into thinking this was a smooth transition. The road ahead is hard, winding, and filled with shadows. The old world, its palaces, its bureaucracy, its need to control everything from wheat to weddings is gone. What remains is a mosaic of memory and struggle, and just when you think the worst is over, you hear hoofbeats, lots of them, but they're not coming from behind you. They're coming from a place you thought was already gone. You press your ear to the ground. The hoofbeats thrum like distant thunder, but they're steady, rhythmic, not a raiding party, not wild. This is organized, and they're heading your way. You clamber up a dusty ridge overlooking a narrow valley, and there, like ghosts rising from the grave, are chariots, hundreds of them, two-wheeled, horse-drawn, their bronze fittings glinting in the sun like lightning bolts frozen in time. But something feels off. You squint. These aren't the lavish, gold-encrusted royal chariots of yesteryear. They're stripped down, patched together rigs, pulled by horses that look worn but tough. Their drivers are grim, not ceremonial. These are survivors, soldiers from fractured kingdoms, banding together for survival. The remnants of the Hittites, perhaps, or the last Mycenaeans. Some might even be former sea peoples. You don't know, and honestly, they probably don't either, because this is what happens when an entire world breaks apart. You stop being who you were, and you become whatever you need to be next. A charioteer pulls up near you. He tosses you a water skin and says nothing. His armor is stitched from goat hide and scraps of bronze. There's a faded symbol on his bracer, maybe a sun or a lion. It meant something once. Now it's just decoration. You ride with them a while. the sun blazing overhead. You pass fields gone wild, towns reduced to rubble and dust. In one place, someone's tried to rebuild a shrine with river stones and driftwood. A single clay idol stands watch, face half melted by fire. You light a candle anyway. Everywhere, you see relics of the past being carried like burdens. A woman hauls a cracked statue on her back. A boy wears a ceremonial crown like it's a helmet. These people don't just mourn what was lost, they carry it, literally, into the unknown. Historians still debate what caused the rise of these chariot militias. Were they mercenaries banding together post-collapse? Were they local warlords staking claims in a vacuum of power? Or were they grassroots defenders, protecting trade routes and orphaned villages? The record is fuzzy, at best, but the wheels kept turning, one way or another. You stop at a makeshift outpost, once a minor city now reduced to dirt roads and burnt walls. A group of elders sits around a cracked sundial, arguing quietly over a map scratched into the dirt. It shows old trade routes, Egypt to Ugarit, Hattusa to Mycenae. Someone draws a big red X through them all. Not symbolic, just realistic. A merchant approaches you, his cart squeaking under the weight of copper ingots and dried figs. No more gold, he mutters. Too dangerous, too shiny. You trade a bronze pin for a strip of salted fish and wonder when fish became more valuable than gold. You find a stone tablet in a collapsed archive, half buried in clay dust. It's written in Akkadian, once the diplomatic lingua franca of the region, but it's been hastily copied by someone who clearly forgot half the characters. It's a trade agreement, but you can't tell if it was ever honored. That's the thing writing survived, but its power didn't, and the chariots roll on. You pass what used to be a military outpost, now repurposed as a refugee hub. A group of artisans is rebuilding part of the wall, not for defense, but to hang tapestries. One of them gives you a spindle and teaches you to twist wool. Your hands fumble at first, but there's something soothing about the rhythm. The woman laughs softly and says, "Everything ends, so we spin it new." Emotion sneaks in again when you least expect it. You enter a dilapidated temple where a single priest still performs rites to forgotten gods. He burns incense, sweet, cloying, with a note of pine, and chants a name you've never heard. You ask if it's one of the old gods. He shrugs. It's one I like. That night, under the stars, the chariot warriors light no fires. Too dangerous. You lie on your back, watching constellations that haven't changed in 3,000 years. Though everything below them has, you think about how whole civilizations used to rise and fall beneath those same stars, whispering prayers into the same sky. Then, one of the horses spooks. The riders jump. You sit up, heart thudding. It's not another raid. It's a messenger. She's breathless, clothes torn, and there's blood, though you can't tell who's east. She gasps. Something stirs in the east. You look where she points, just hills and haze. But the chariot leader narrows his eyes. "Assyria," he mutters. "Assyria now, there's a name that hasn't cracked yet. One of the few powers to hold on through the chaos. Smaller, maybe, harsher, definitely, but still there, and maybe, just maybe, rising." Fringe historians whisper about how Assyria's resilience might be due to their central administration, strong military, and ruthless efficiency. Others think it was just dumb luck they weren't near the sea, and therefore not a sea people snack. You pack up and ride east. On the way, you pass a group of scribes preserving scrolls by copying them onto strips of bark. One of them hums while he works. Another is painting scenes from memory grand halls, ships with striped sails, gods with eagle heads. You realize they're not trying to rebuild. They're trying not to forget. You arrive at the border of the Assyrian world and find walls. Real ones. Maintained. Manned. You're stopped. Questioned. Inspected. It's jarring. After so much lawlessness, inside, order hums quietly. It's not the glory of old empires, but it's something. A potter throws clay in a spinning blur. A market sells dried lentils and bitter herbs. A school teaches the children how to write. One girl asks how to spell tomorrow. The teacher smiles, then hesitates. You look back west. Smoke on the horizon. Chariots in retreat. Cities still crumbling. But ahead, something ancient. Something hard. And something that, against all odds, has not fallen. Not yet. The city gates creak shut behind you, and for the first time in a long while, you hear a sound you almost don't recognize routine. Inside Assyria, life hasn't just survived, it's hardened, calcified, and gritted its teeth. This isn't revival with a smile. It's survival with a snarl. You walk through Nineveh, yes. That Nineveh, though it isn't the glorious capital it'll one day become. Right now, it's a cluster of strongholds stitched together with ambition and clay. The scent of bitumen fills your nose thick and acrid, like burned rubber and old promises. Soldiers march past in formation, bronze helmets dented but polished. No pageantry, just precision. You duck into a shady alley to avoid a patrol, and that's when you see it: order, real order. It's written on everything, walls covered in fresh clay tablets with dates, decrees, food tallies, no graffiti, no chaos, just control. Assyria isn't just keeping the lights on, it's making sure you pay your candle tax on time. Historians still debate whether this rigidity was Assyria's saving grace or its eventual undoing. Some argue that centralization and military strength allowed them to weather the storm. Others say they were simply lucky to be inland, away from the worst of the sea peoples and famine. A few fringe theorists even suggest that Assyria welcomed the collapse elsewhere, seizing power amid the chaos like a hyena at a lion's funeral feast. Whatever the truth, you can't argue with results. You pass a public bulletin being read aloud by a crier: tax adjustments due to grain shortages, reward notices for escaped prisoners, a poem praising the king's left eyebrow, only slightly exaggerated. You wonder who writes these. Turns out, the scribal class here never stopped training. There's even a school, the House of the Tablet, someone calls it. Inside, children recite cuneiform syllables with rhythmic chants. One boy, no older than 10, is translating a treaty from 200 years ago with the deadpan focus of a man triple his age. You wonder what bedtime stories sound like here. Probably terrifying. In the marketplace, things are equally intense. No bartering, fixed prices. A basket of lentils costs 1 silver piece. You try to haggle with an old woman, and she laughs so hard she snorts. This isn't Ugarit, she says. Here we count. You hand over your coin, and yet It's not all grim. In a quiet courtyard, you stumble on a music teacher showing a young girl how to play the lyre. The notes ring out soft and sweet, echoing against sandstone walls. For a moment, you close your eyes and almost forget the crumbled cities behind you. Almost, but you're reminded quickly when a convoy arrives from the West refugees again. This group is different, wealthier, paler. Their accents, Mycenaean. They don't beg. They offer skills. One man's a mason, another a healer. A woman presents a roll of sea silk. Yes, silk from the sea, spun from mollusks. It glimmers with a ghostly sheen. A governor inspects it, nods, and offers them housing. And just like that, the edges of the old world begin to stitch into the new one, but not without tension. In a tavern, yes. Even Assyria has taverns. You overhear murmurs, locals complaining about too many Westerners, fears that they'll bring disease, disorder, or strange gods. They worship bulls, someone mutters, and snakes. You sip your fermented barley drink and pretend not to listen. But you know that tone, it's fear dressed up as tradition. Still, the empire expands, slowly, methodically, like a chess player with all the time in the world. One night, you're invited to a temple ceremony honoring Asher, the national god. It's quiet, disciplined. Priests move in synchronized steps, incense burning in straight, controlled lines. No wild dancing, no ecstatic trance, just solemn devotion, like everyone's trying to impress the divine accountant in the sky. You slip behind the temple afterward and find something strange, an old shrine, half buried beneath the foundation. It's older than Assyria, a relic from a forgotten city-state. The god's name is worn away, but the statue's eyes still gleam, catching the moonlight in a way that makes your spine go stiff. History layers like that here, one belief atop another, one culture quietly absorbing the one it replaces, sometimes by trade, sometimes by conquest, sometimes just by refusing to die. And then there's the letters. A scribe, impressed with your weird outsider curiosity, shows you a hidden archive letters from kings long dead, some still sealed, some cracked open like ancient fortune cookies. One letter is from a Hittite prince, desperately begging Assyria for grain. Another is from Egypt, cautiously welcoming Assyria into shared trade routes with a not-so-subtle don't-get-ideas postscript. And then one more, a reply to a now-lost plea from Cyprus. We cannot help. We guard our borders. The tone is cold, not cruel, just final. Emotion stirs again when you witness a funeral. A soldier, fallen in a border skirmish. His family weeps quietly as he's wrapped in linen and lowered into a stone pit. The priest offers coins and honey, then steps back. The sun hits the grave at an angle that bathes it in gold. You don't know his name, but you feel the weight of everything he carried: the wars, the order, the sheer exhaustion of being the stronghold that never fell. As you prepare to leave, you glance back one more time at the city walls. They're crude by modern standards, just mud brick and ambition, but they held when the world unraveled. Assyria didn't flinch. It adapted, it calcified, it endured, and while others tried to recreate the past, Assyria leaned into the future, no matter how cold it looked. But there's something stirring beyond those walls again. In the distance, across shifting sands and burnt out valleys, another force rises not with swords or scrolls, but with stories, new ones, ones that don't rely on palaces or grain. And you begin to wonder, what if the real power lies not in surviving the collapse, but in telling the tale of it afterward? You leave the Assyrian stronghold behind with dust on your boots and bureaucracy ringing in your ears. There's a strange comfort in its order, sure, but it's not your story. Not yet. You head southwest now, toward the Levant, a ribbon of contested coastline stretching between old ruins and new routes, where chaos didn't just tear things down, it planted something strange in the rubble. You crest a hill at sunrise, and there it is, the Phoenician coast, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos. The names sound ancient, even now, but in this moment, they're not relics, they're experiments, because unlike most other places, the Phoenicians didn't try to rebuild what was lost. They pivoted, fast, like a street magician who swaps a ruined card trick for fire juggling. They took one look at the collapsing empires around them and thought, maybe it's time we try boats. You walk through Byblos first, where the air smells like brine and cedar. Always cedar, sweet, sharp, and proud. They say the gods themselves used it to build temples. Here, it's currency. You run your hand along a freshly cut beam and feel the buzz of something deeper than trade. It's memory, solidified in wood. In the harbor, the sound of hammers and waves competes with a shouting match in 3 different languages: Egyptian, Canaanite, maybe some leftover Hittite. You spot merchants arguing over a crate of purple dye. Tyrian purple, 1 drop can stain a garment forever. You touch a fingertip to a broken shard of cloth. It's not just rich, it's electric. No wonder kings fought over this stuff. And that's what the Phoenicians understood. The Bronze Age was gone, but trade, that never dies. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians were descendants of Canaanites who adapted quickly, or a distinct group who rose as others fell. Either way, their genius wasn't military strength or monumental architecture. It was movement, flexibility. You don't need an empire if your ships can reach 10 of them. You hitch a ride on one of their trading vessels, a narrow, creaky galley manned by men who smell like fish and optimism. You sail south, hugging the coast, dodging pirate coves and sunken temples. They teach you how to lash cargo without spilling lentils, how to read the stars when the shoreline disappears, how to shout insults in 6 dialects, only one of which is technically legal in Byblos. But even at sea, the collapse clings. You pass ruined port cities where the docks sag like broken teeth. Fishermen toss nets into empty waters. One town has completely relocated inland after a tsunami swallowed its coastal heart. The captain tells you they now call it Old Beach, even though there's no beach anymore, only ghosts. Still, these sailors laugh loudly. One plays a reed pipe while another tells you a joke about a Hittite, an Egyptian, and a very angry goat. You don't get the punchline, but the laughter is real, raw, because for the Phoenicians, joy is strategy. When the old gods vanish and the kings stop sending tribute, you start trading smiles and sardines. You land next in Tyre, where the stone walls shimmer with salt and sun. It's crowded, bustling, no grand palace, just layers of homes built atop one another like barnacles on a whale. The markets overflow with olive oil, papyrus, copper, garum, glass beads, and gossip. One woman tries to sell you a cursed amulet. She swears it once belonged to a sea people warlord who choked on an oyster. You buy it anyway. Feels like a good luck charm. Somehow, at night, you sit with an old sailor who tells stories of distant lands, places the Phoenicians will eventually colonize Carthage, Malta, even bits of Spain. But he speaks of them as dreams, not destinations. We plant our cities like driftwood, he says, sipping something foul but warm, where the tides take us. That's home. You find emotion again in a tiny temple tucked behind a warehouse. It's dedicated to Astarte, the goddess of love and war. Inside, there's no priest, just offerings shells, bits of jewelry, scraps of handwritten prayers. One says, "Let my son return before the summer storm." Another, "Bring me a wife who laughs like the sea." You sit a while. The incense smells like cloves and oranges. You don't leave a prayer, but you listen. Then comes the strange part. In Sidon, you meet a man copying symbols onto clay tablets, but they're not cuneiform. They're simpler, more efficient, alphabetic. Your brow furrows. Easier to teach, he says. Faster to trade. He hands you a tablet. You sound out the letters slowly. Each symbol, a sound, not a whole idea, just a sound. Revolutionary. You realize what this is: the roots of an alphabet that will one day shape the world. From Greek to Latin to your own bedtime stories. It starts here. Fringe historians argue that this invention was born not from elite scribes, but from merchants tired of paying them. Democratized writing, a literacy of necessity, and it stuck. That's the strange beauty of the Phoenicians in an age of collapse. They innovated not to control, but to connect. Trade routes instead of borders, alphabets instead of armies. Their gods were flexible, their cities mobile, their power fluid, and yet not invincible. One morning, you wake to find the harbor on edge. A ship limps in from Cyprus, the crew's thin, eyes wild. Fire, one of them says. They burned everything. You watch the town hold its breath. They've seen this before. Raids haven't stopped. The sea peoples, or whoever inherited their chaos, still roam. And Phoenician cities, for all their cleverness, are small, vulnerable. They don't conquer, they survive, which means always being ready to run, always ready to shift. You look out at the sea, somewhere beyond those waves. Carthage doesn't exist yet, but it will. Sidon might fall, Tyre might burn, but the Phoenicians, they'll keep sailing, keep carving alphabets into clay, then papyrus, then memory. You run your hand over the rail of a departing ship. The wood is warm, worn smooth by years of palms merchants, sailors, refugees, dreamers, all of them part of something small but unstoppable, because while empires crumble, ideas float, and the sea always remembers. The sun sets behind you as you follow the coastline into Egypt. Though calling it Egypt now feels generous, it's still here, yes, but barely. A faded grandeur clinging to its temples, like the last rays of light clinging to a sandstorm. You arrive not by chariot or royal bark, but by foot dusty, hungry, and maybe a little disoriented after so many collapsed kingdoms. The moment you step into the delta, the air shifts thicker, sweeter, almost swampy. Papyrus sways beside shallow canals, and frogs croak like they're trying to remember what peace sounded like. Welcome to the land of the Nile, where even the gods seem tired. Memphis stands awkwardly ahead, one foot in the past and the other sinking into the alluvial muck of the present. The monuments are still there, chipped but proud, their hieroglyphs weathered by time and maybe a little embarrassment. You pass a scribe chiseling over a name in a wall the old pharaoh struck from memory. Happens more often than you'd think. The people here, they still look to the past, but with clenched jaws. Temples are under repair. Grain silos are guarded like royal tombs, and every fifth person you meet is a soldier, though few look like they'd survive a full afternoon in the sun. See, Egypt didn't fall like the others. It staggered. Historians still debate whether Ramesses III's reign marked a heroic last stand or a desperate holding pattern before a slow unravel. Either way, it was chaos management on a god-sized scale. You wander into a public square where someone's performing a ritual half theatrical, half political. A priest in leopard skin dances around a brazier while an older woman throws salt into the flames. People chant. One child, perhaps too loud, asks, "Will the grain ships return this year?" The priest freezes. That wasn't in the script. There's no answer. And the silence says everything. But Egypt's real story during the Bronze Age collapse isn't about falling. It's about scrambling to hold what remains. You see it in the papyri being copied in haste military reports, ship logs, food inventories, lists of temple offerings adjusted for regional instability. It's crisis after crisis wrapped in formal prose. One particularly vivid scroll mentions Libyan incursions, sea peoples attacking from the north, and internal revolts all at once. Triple threat. But the kicker, the complaint that bread rations had to be cut at the temple of Amun, not the temple guards, the priests. That's how you know it's serious. And then there's the tomb robbing. Oh yes, the great tombs of Egypt, once sealed with divine curses and massive stones, are being ransacked by desperate hands. You sneak into a trial one afternoon, a scribe and 3 guards accused of looting the resting place of a lesser prince. The prosecutor reads their confessions aloud, though it's whispered they were beaten into giving them. The courtroom is sweltering. No fans, just flies. One man sobs, another stares into space. They're guilty, sure, but you wonder who wouldn't be when the granaries are empty and the pharaoh's power feels more theatrical than divine. Still, there's beauty here, odd pockets of it. A sculptor shows you a statue he's carving not of a god, but of his daughter. If we forget the gods, he says, we can at least remember each other. You touch the polished cheek. It's smooth, almost lifelike, and somehow more sacred than a dozen broken obelisks. You wander out to Thebes, where the temples rise like sleeping giants. Karnak, Luxor, their columns stand like petrified forests, each one wider than your wingspan. The silence here is different, not empty, but reverent. Birds nest in crevices. Lizards skitter along sacred carvings. A breeze carries the scent of lotus and thyme. Inside one dark chamber, You trace the story of a battle Rameses smiting his enemies, always in that perfectly awkward smiting pose, arm up, knee out, like he's mid-dance. You chuckle, then stop, because beneath it, carved hastily and crooked a single line in hieratic script. Do not believe everything carved in stone. You step back. No one knows who wrote it. A temple cleaner, a frustrated scribe, a rebellious priest. Fringe theorists love it. Official historians pretend it isn't there. But there it is, whispering through the centuries. Still, Egypt doesn't give up. In the towns, local leaders rise. Some are former generals, others, wealthy landowners. There's even talk of a queen leading a Nile province with more sense than the palace scribes put together. No one can agree on her name, or if she ever existed. But the rumor gives people something to hold on to. And the gods, they're evolving too. You visit a modest shrine built not to Osiris or Horus, but to an odd hybrid deity, part Anubis, part Baal, new god for new times. The caretaker says with a shrug, still likes incense, still listens sometimes. He winks. You light a cone of myrrh, just in case. Then one day, you hear music, not the temple hymns, but something looser, laughter, stringed instruments, clapping. You follow the sound to a riverside gathering. People share food, trade stories, play games. One girl draws a boat in the mud and says, "This one sails all the way to Punt." You smile, because here's the thing. Egypt didn't vanish. It bled, adapted, fragmented, and it did what it always had. It made stories, even out of scarcity, even out of collapse. The next morning, you help an old man dig a canal. Still gotta move water, he says, collapse or no. His hands are cracked, but steady as the first trickle of Nile water rushes through the trench. He grins. There, civilization. And that's what it comes down to here. Not glory or gold or the perfect pyramid alignment. Just water moving through dirt, grain reaching mouths, memory passing through hands. You leave Egypt under a blazing sun, its dunes stretching like the folds of an old book. The final chapter not yet written, but something stirs in the west. In tiny huts, shepherds write verses. In hilltop villages, people hammer iron. And in the shadows of broken palaces, new languages begin to hum, not in hieroglyphs or tablets, but in stories carried by wind and footsteps and time. And you wonder, is the world really ending or just beginning again? You leave the Nile behind, heavy with sand in your sandals and the aftertaste of lotus still in your breath. The sun creeps westward, but the story isn't done. You're pulled inland now toward the highlands, the small valleys, the places that had no seat at the Bronze Age table, places no one expected to matter. But then again, no one expected the table to flip. You make your way through Canaanite ruins, swallowed by weeds, over hilltops where olive trees cling to cracked terraces, and down into ravines where herders whistle to stubborn goats. It's quieter out here, not just literally existentially. These people didn't build golden palaces. They built fences. They didn't trade ivory. They traded sheep. And now it's their turn, because while empires clashed, starved, and collapsed under their own monumental weight, the highland tribes, those so-called nobodies, were watching, waiting, planting barley in silence, sharing stories by firelight, whispering new names for old gods. Historians still debate whether these hill tribes were displaced Canaanites, escaped slaves, or a wild stew of both. But by 1150 BCE, they begin to carve out a different kind of society, not built on tribute or gold leaf or elaborate death masks, but on survival, on kinship, on adaptability. You pass a circle of stones atop a hill where an elder tells children how the sea peoples once came, but the hills held firm. They can't raid what they can't reach, he says, poking the fire. One child asks if the gods protected them. He shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe the goats were just meaner back then. There's laughter, the kind that comes from shared hardship, not comedy. In one village, someone invites you into a house stone walls, flat roof, packed earth floor. It's clean, comfortable, smells of lentils and warm bread. And on the wall, not a god king, not a war trophy, but a family tree, carved into clay. You run your fingers across the names, each one short, simple. One even sounds familiar. You ask. But they shake their head. Just a name, they say. Just people. Yet something stirs, because these aren't just survivors. They're creators. You hike a few hours to a rocky ridge where a cluster of homes has sprung up around a spring. A woman teaches children to scratch marks into broken pottery, not decorative symbols. Letters, crude, sure, but phonetic. Your brain buzzes. This feels familiar. These people aren't copying Egyptian hieroglyphs or Hittite cuneiform. They're inventing something new, simple, repeatable, a writing system for everyone, and it catches. In the shadows of collapsed kingdoms, language shifts, rituals soften, old traditions fray and recombine. You hear snippets of myth that sound like fragments of future religions. A flood, a mountain, a burning bush, one night, under a sky riddled with stars. A boy asks you, "Do you believe gods speak through fire?" You hesitate, then nod. Sometimes. He smiles. Me too, but I think they also speak through sheep. You chuckle, then pause, because he's not wrong. Maybe divinity isn't found in thrones and crowns, but in moments, in fireside wisdom, in shepherds watching stars. That's the thing with the end of an age. It looks like silence, but it's full of murmurs. You just have to listen differently. Further north, you pass a village forging tools from a strange new metal. It's not shiny like bronze. It's duller, stronger, iron. It clinks with promise. Blacksmiths bang out blades that don't snap like bronze in a hard fight. They teach one another as they go, no formal guilds yet. Just hands learning by repetition. Someone burns their palm on a blade, then jokes. At least we know it's real now. Iron doesn't just reshape weapons. It reshapes people. Farmers with iron plows till faster. Tribes that once bowed to chariot-riding kings now wield tools too sharp to ignore. Power redistributes slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. And still, from behind the veil of dust and fire, new ideas emerge. You reach a cluster of shrines built with care but no grandeur. One doesn't even have a statue, just a standing stone and a silence you feel in your chest. It's a place of prayer. Sure, but not for rain or war or gold. For peace, for justice. Some scholars whisper that around this time. A certain Highland group starts telling stories of a singular god, Not one among many, but one above them. You don't know if that's true yet. The echoes are faint, but you hear the rhythm. You sit by a small river, the water cool, the banks quiet. A traveler next to you plays a flute made of bone and tells you about a new city forming near the coast, small, stubborn, determined to never serve a pharaoh again. You both laugh, but something inside you wonders, will they succeed? It's a good question, because the Bronze Age collapse didn't end with a bang. It ended with kindling, and here, among goats and iron, reeds and ink, you see sparks everywhere. You hear it in lullabies sung in a brand new dialect, in laughter rising from a dinner of lentils and wild herbs, in children racing past you, shouting names that no one will write down yet. You realize the collapse didn't destroy civilization, it decentralized it. Instead of a few massive kingdoms hoarding knowledge, power, and foods, 1,000 tiny nodes emerge, each one experimenting, adapting, surviving. Some will be forgotten, others will change the world, but not yet. For now, you rise one last time, feet aching, heart full. The sun dips low behind you, casting your shadow long across the valley. You started in glittering palaces and walked through fire, famine, invasion, and reinvention. And where did you arrive? Here, on a nameless hill, with iron in one hand and alphabet in the other. And it feels hopeful, because in the cracks of collapse, you didn't just see endings, you saw seeds. So now, after a journey that spanned continents and centuries, it's time to rest. The winds that once howled through shattered palaces have quieted. The fires that scorched once mighty cities have faded into embers, and the countless feet farmers, scribes, queens, and wanderers that shaped the dust beneath your own have stopped moving just for a while. Take a slow breath. The world you've walked through wasn't neat or tidy. It was confusing, wild, unfair, beautiful. In that way, only real stories ever are. And maybe that's what lingers most as you settle into the stillness, not the collapse itself, but what came after, the small hands that kept writing, the voices that kept singing, the feet that kept walking forward. Even when the road disappeared, you lie back, letting the hum of memory fade into the hush of night. Outside your window, the world hasn't collapsed, not tonight. And even if it did, you'd know what to do. You'd listen, you'd adapt, you'd survive, you'd tell stories. The darkness wraps around you now like a warm, well-worn cloak. The stars above hang silent and soft, like ancient watchmen who've seen it all before. And maybe they have. Maybe they saw the fall of Troy, the flicker of the last Minoan torch, the first Phoenician sail cutting through moonlight. But they also see you, breathing slowly, gently, still here. The story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.